thank you so much, everyone, for joining this session. It's really great to see how keen everyone is to hear, and thank you for accommodating us with the space challenges. So here we go, there's your presentation. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Adelaide for her presentation. I'll let you explain, and Amy you can cue Amy for when you want a new slide. Okay, yes. All right, I'll also just time you on the 15 minutes, but I trust you. And yeah, we can always eat lunch later.
Hello, thank you so much for attending this session. I'm so happy to see it as full as it is now. It brings me joy. I'm not going to waste any time by reading my title because it is in front of us at this stage. I'm going to now go to my next slide where I set out the outline of my presentation. I'm going to speak from a legal lens, so I'm going to start off with setting out the legislative framework for Africanization, to which African Unity is a part thereof. I will then deal with the debate of African students as internationals, how so? And after that, I will look at the impacts of the present disconnect. And lastly, I will end with the way forward and my concluding remarks. So I'm going to start off my discussion with the constitutive act of the African Union. You may then ask, why are we discussing regional instruments? Why is that relevant for our purposes here today? Well, the answer to that is two-faceted. Firstly, the leaders that we will elect must be in line with the principles of the African Union to which we are bound by. Remember, we are member states. And then we must be able to hold them accountable when they do not fall in line with what it is that we are bound by. And secondly, these regional instruments influence the interpretation of our domestic law. So our constitution there is interpreted in the context of these regional instruments, okay? Especially our Bill of Rights. So the discussion is relevant. I'm going to start off with the preamble. In the preamble, we hear that the role of the Union and its member states, including ourselves, is the affirmation of a common African identity, which also then includes the attainment of unity within the continent. The performance of our mandate must then be guided by the common vision of a united and strong Africa. Article 3 tells us that the objectives of the Union are to achieve a greater unity and solidarity within African countries and also amongst the African peoples. From the African Union, we then see the adoption of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. And we know that this particular charter has an Afrocentric approach. It was the first regional instrument to draw the emphasis between communal rights and collectivism. So the essence of Ubuntu is deeply rooted in this particular charter. In terms of this charter, we see that our duty as a states party is to be conscious of the total liberation of Africa, especially people who are still struggling with their dignity and genuine independence. We also need to dismantle all forms of discrimination, which include those on racial and ethnic lines. That's our obligation there. We also then see that we need to individually and collectively work towards strengthening African unity and solidarity. The Charter then also has another element where we look at the individual duties. So there are duties upon each and every one of us in this room. So never mind the states party. What is the obligation on me? Well, every single one of us in this room has the duty to respect and consider their fellow human beings without discrimination, maintain relations and promote, safeguard and reinforce mutual respect and tolerance. Again, the elements of Ubuntu. in terms of Article 29, we then see that each and every one of us in this room has the duty to preserve and strengthen positive African cultural values. And most importantly, to contribute to the best of our abilities at all times and all levels, including this platform that we have here today, to the promotion and achievement of African unity. How many of us know that this is binding on us? We then move on to the discussion of Agenda 2063. This document was drafted in 2015. The Africa we want. In terms of this document, we see a number of aspirations in terms of where we see ourselves as a continent. We see ourselves by this year as a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. In terms of aspiration 2, we see ourselves by this year as an integrated continent, politically united based on the ideals of Pan-Africanism and the vision of African Renaissance. And right at the bottom there, we see ourselves, Africa will be, not may, by the year 2063, a united Africa that has world-class infrastructure that crisscrosses the continent. How are we going to achieve that? We look at our trading policies at the moment. Do they align with this? Is it possible? Aspiration 5, we commit ourselves to being an Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics. Again, the notions of Ubuntu, Pan-Africanism, and so forth. Yes. And then aspiration 7, we see ourselves as a strong Africa, united, resilient, an influential global player and partner. Right at the bottom, those 2 last bullet points there. We will be a major partner in global affairs, and we will take full responsibility to finance our own growth and transformation, and we will no longer be donor dependent. How far are we from this? Now, to bring it home, the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, in the framing and the context of the regional instruments I've set out, do we see the notions of Ubuntu in terms of our own domestic law? And the answer to that is yes. We see from the preamble with in the Constitution that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. Although Ubuntu, if we do a word search, is not expressly listed in this final constitution, it was listed in the interim constitution of 1993, we still read it in. The constitution is so intentional in the way that is written that Ubuntu is actually a present living value. Bringing it to our university, our statement of commitment on an inclusive institutional culture in terms of our Vision 2030 has been quite intentional in its approach that we too align with the concept, the value of Ubuntu. We denounce all forms of discrimination and exclusion, and we embrace all forms of diversity within our space. We have been quite intentional in that. It seems quite good there and quite interesting that we see Ubuntu as the first value right at the top within our document, closely followed by social justice and equality. I think that framing was intentional. We know that Ubuntu is then the overarching value that will seep into all the rest that come thereof. So our institution is aware of that. Now coming to the aspect of African students as internationals, how so? So we've read the statement of commitment, we know what the values are. I've just put these pictures here because they were quite triggering. The one with the little A4 paper there was taken during registration. It says study abroad and exchange students registration venue. That African flag there at the bottom seems quite misplaced. And then the other image, international alumni. It was quite drawing to see where this alumni, the bulk is coming from. It is ourselves. So interesting. In engaging with the debate of how African students can be regarded as internationals, I have a number of questions there that will assist us in that engagement. For instance, is the value and concept of Ubuntu exclusive to South Africa? Is it rather an African concept? Is it the African lived experience? Is it the African way of being? We must pause and think about that. We see in terms of Section 6.1 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa that 11 official languages are listed there. We see isiPedi, we see isiNdebele, isiXhosa, we see Zulu. Are those South African languages or are those African languages? To assist us there in that comparative analysis, I have included an extract from the Zimbabwean Constitution. Also, Section 6, we see there the intersections. There goes Ndebele, there goes Sotho, there goes Tswana, there goes Venda, there goes Xhosa. And we can engage in that comparative analysis again and again and again and again, right? What about cultural practices, traditions, and rituals? We look at marriage ceremonies and coming of age ceremonies. Are those exclusive to South Africa or a particular African country? Or is that part of the African heritage that cuts from, to the South? What about the societal and economic and political challenges in South Africa? Load shedding, corruption. Are those exclusive or unique to South Africa? Or are those African problems that need African solutions formulated by Africans? Something to ponder there. What are the impacts of the disconnect? Well, we know there's differential treatment. We have a specific office that deals with the administration of African students separately from South African students, which are also African students. We have a sense of loss of identity, a sense of loss of belonging somewhere there. And how does that compromise this value of Ubuntu? Do all African students in the university space consider Mandela University home? When they touch the soil here, do they say, this is my home, I belong here? How do African students show their solidarity, especially within the context of Ubuntu? Do all African students stand together and protest and critically engage on issues of inequality within South Africa and the continent in the broader light? Here we're talking about issues of funding. We're talking about human rights violations across the continent. Do we all know about the genocide in Sudan and Somalia? Do we sit down and talk about that? To what extent do all African students envision that the skills and knowledges that they will acquire in terms of their qualifications will contribute towards the African transformative agenda? Again, that document, that framework document, the Africa we want. How are we going to contribute? Do we think about how we're going to contribute? Does the present disconnect in any way assist us in combating black on black violences that are deeply rooted in coloniality within the university space and beyond? Here we're talking about Afrophobia. How does this assist us in combating that? Again, a question for us to ponder. Now, the way forward and my concluding remarks. The framing and the implementation of the full integration of Africans in the university space obviously needs to be reimagined. We understand that it will be an ongoing process. It will take time. That's fair and fine. However, As part of our immediate measures, we must refuse to be addressed and treated as internationals. We must refuse to identify ourselves as internationals. We must refrain from addressing others who are one with us as internationals. We must be clear in the message that we're sending out as a dynamic African university and this African students that we're attracting here. We must be the Africa we want to see. Again, that document. We must not wait for our sister university, WITS, UCT, to adopt this approach and then we follow suit. We're not in the copying business here. In the context of the legacy we want to build, if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adelaide. And on that note, because I don't want to waste too much time, Cliff, I'll let you introduce yourself as you would prefer to be introduced.
Hello, everybody. My name is Clifford Uwoya. I am from Nigeria, but when I was registering this year, I registered as an international student. Just gonna put that there. Okay, so I don't have a slide. I'm just gonna speak. Let's talk. Let us discuss. I'm speaking about when we speak about returning to the source, returning to the indigenous knowledge systems. Is it ontological veneration of the past? Is it regressive, or could it be an epistemic charge for the future? I know it's a couple of big words there, but let us break it down. Fela Anikulapo Kuti, he was a musician in Nigeria, also an intellectual. He made a statement. He said, in a song of his, Shopping and Smiling, he said, "You Africans, listen to me as Africans, and you non-Africans, listen to me with open mind." Very beautiful statement there, because it's an acknowledgement of not knowing. You see, on my shirt, I put Clifford here, and I'd like to go by the name Clifford. And I have had people tell me I'm taking a colonial name. No, my mom gave me that name. However, my mom engaged with the word Clifford and its colonial roots, I do not know, but Omia engaged with this name. My mom gave me this name and I wear it proudly. So, when you engage with me on my name, come with the not knowing and we'll be fine. So, before I even go forward now, I want to say, if you're a sociologist in here, engage with me as a sociologist. If you're not a sociologist, engage with me with open mind. But even the word African, you know, I like a quote from Kwame Nkrumah. It says, "I'm not African because I was born in this continent. I'm African because Africa was born in me." So even the tenets of Africanization, it's beyond just a geographical space. It's an ideology that we can be from this continent and subscribe to, and you can actually be in Europe and subscribe to. Our comrades in this struggle are not only in this continent. So, why are we looking back? What is the point of IKS? Is it just to say, wow, look at our history. It's very beautiful. We did such wonderful stuff in the past. How relevant is that for today? Do we look at it and venerate it? Or do we look at IKS and say, can we use that in the way we know, in the way we do research today, in our curriculum, in the way the university positions itself? Can this be relevant for the future as we chart in this new reimagined university that we want? So I don't have the answer to that. All of us must think about it. But let's bring some theorists over the years and let's see how relevant they are. And as I'm presenting, I would use myself as a scapegoat. So there will be a lot of reflexivity as I do this. So just the way I spoke about my name, I cannot take away the fact I grew up in Nigeria. And growing up in that country came about with certain ideologies that were embedded in me. Coming to South Africa, there was a dissonance because this is a different context. And so my argument is in everybody, there's a teacher and there's a student. Everybody. Now, I'm not talking about the traditional power relations of teacher at the top and student at the bottom. No. Even the lecturers, you're also students too. You can learn from the students. So we must first address that. And I'll go back again to Fela because I'm also a student of Fela. Fela says, teacher, don't teach me nonsense. What does Fela mean? It means what it is we have put in our curriculum in the university has to be relevant. But even in that statement, teacher, don't teach me nonsense, there's also a willingness from him to learn. So there has to be that willingness. Now, I'm not going to go deep into their theory, but Magema Fuze published in Zulu, and you can easily engage with his works and be like, he published in Zulu, Zulu, that's great. But what was the concepts he was engaging in? Is it so much the fact that he was publishing in that language where he was addressing knowledge and he was rethinking knowledge? And if we mind that knowledge, there's something we can learn. Because we're speaking about ordering. And that notion of ordering cuts across. You look at Achimafeje talking about the negation, you know, and you look at Akiwowo in Nigeria, you know, speaking about the same thing. And they were using different languages, but they were engaging with, it cut across. I mean, go all the way back to Fanon, you know, when he was writing about how the experience is not, the experience of the previously colonized is not relative to just spaces because there's shared experiences, but it would look different in different spaces. Nigeria did not have apartheid. So our experience is very different, thank you, from that of South Africa. But you can see some similarities. The struggle cuts across. So when we look at Africanization and when we start attacking these little nuances that come out of Africanization, like xenophobia and all these other new names, which is still the same root. It's still the same roots of discrimination, of inequality, of hate, and it's not just white-black. It's ideologies, and it can be black-black. So in Nigeria, I'm not fighting the white man, I'm fighting my government, because my government is the problem there, and they have the same skin color as me. So just to say, then we bring it now to Biko. What was Biko trying to say when he was speaking about black consciousness? It was still that same thing of the emancipation of the mind. And he was not telling us that so we can say, Biko, you're such a smart man. No, he was saying that because we need that to move forward. We need to look back to move forward. And then Cabral, Amilcar Cabral from Guinea, was saying the exact same thing also for the Guinea people, that we need to return to the source. But as we return to the source, this has to drive the forward move. And even Fanon said, this struggle, this emancipation we want, is not just, it cannot end with just complaining about colonialism. And it's not going to work if there's no ideology. Ideology is very important. And so now bringing it to myself, right? Coming from Nigeria, where, and I'll give one example of the teacher-learner dichotomy. If you, it's in our law that if someone is homosexual, they go to jail for 14 years. Now, I would be remiss if I said I didn't come here homophobic, right? Because this is the society I grew up in. And I came to South Africa and I had a choice. I could learn, or I could say, this is how I am, this is my culture, this is how I grew up in. And I would not humanize myself. Or I could come into a university that promotes, that one of the values is the respect for diversity. And I can learn. And in that learning, there's an unlearning and there is a relearning. And then sociology. Going and studying my first undergraduate degree, only thrown Western theorists, not one African theorist. Coming to do my PhD thinking I'm so smart, and then Prof. Nomalanga and Prof. Obawa telling me I submitted my first concept note and they said, this is a white paper you just gave to us. And I had a choice again. I could learn or I could complain. And there's been a learning. And in that engagement, I have engaged with some concepts, with some theories that I never knew. And then I can stand here and I can share with you. So as I'm sharing with you, it's your choice again. You can learn or you can say that boy is talking nonsense. That is up to you. But the key is we must realize that the world, and this goes to ontology and epistemology. Now, my research, as I conclude, is based on the Yoruba Ifa orature. In terms of ontology, I use Orumila's perspective, and without going deep into the theory, I'll use a story to explain it for you. So Ogun went to Orumila, and he met with Orumila, and as he was going, Orumila said, "Go fetch something for me from the reception." He went to the reception and he saw this beautiful woman. She only had a bead on, a full breast, everything amazing. And Ogun was just enthralled by this woman and went back to Orumila and said, "Yo, who's that beautiful woman in the reception?" And then Orumila said, "That's my daughter." And he says, "I want to marry her." And he said, "Okay, that's fine." And then after their meeting, he says, "Could you go return this stuff back in the reception?" Ogun goes back to the reception and sees this old, wrinkled woman, very frail, drops the stuff and runs out of there. Comes back and said to Orumila, "Where is the beautiful maiden I saw earlier? All I see is this old, wrinkled woman. Who is that?" And then Orumila said, "That is my very same daughter that you want to marry." You see, you cannot separate the past from the present, from the future. That thing of binaries, it's Aristotelian logic. It's a Western concept. In Tibetan logic, it states that the world is the coexistence of mutually embedded contradictions. What does that mean? It means that that young, beautiful maiden you are marrying today is the very same old, frail lady. They are one and the same. They are not in binaries. They are not separate. So now, as a researcher, I let this inform my ontology. When I go into the field and I do my work, it informs my way of knowing. So when I'm looking to the past, I'm not just saying Orumila said some great stuff. No, I bring it into my research. And, Prof. Becky said in a conference we were in Ghana last year that why don't know researchers doing research with Ubuntu as their conceptual philosophy? Well, thank God Adelaide just gave us an example of how that can be done. But why do we not have more in academia where we're using this African philosophy within our contemporary challenges of today? So we look to the past, not just to venerate it, but as an epistemic charge for the future. Now we all in different disciplines. So I don't know what that's going to look like in chemistry, what that's going to look like in biology, but in sociology, we are a couple of theories are doing it. Prof. Babaloa is mining the knowledge systems within Umakulu. And through that, rethinking how we study family systems within sociology. That research is going to benefit future generations of sociologists. They're not going to now go to school like me and only learn about Max Weber and Emil Durkheim, but they can learn about Babawa Magukwana. But she is doing the work now. But she's looking back as an epistemic charge for the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cliff. And Magda, you are next. I'll also let you introduce yourself. And we're just bringing up your PowerPoint. Thank you. It's up to you. Okay, good. Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. And good afternoon. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to add. Can you hear me? Yes, thank you. So had a few aspects to the very interesting discussion that we had both yesterday and today. First of all, I would like to also say to the women that are sitting in this room, happy Women's Day, because today is the International Women's Day. So, yeah, sisters, we are here. And for academic rigor, I also would like to say that some of the concepts that I'm going to share today have been previously shared at the Acus Africa conference in Ghana. I'm Magda Minguzi, Associate Professor at the School of Architecture and researcher at the Institute for Coastal Marine and Research at the Nelson Mandela University.
Discussing the knowledge production in the educational system in Africa is a very complex topic for many reasons. The main being related to its Western colonial foundation, structured by default under a reductionism, monocultural perspective of the world, together with the otherness approach, which consider the other culture different in the sense that they are unequal, inferior, and inferior, let's say, in fact, inferior by nature, as Bonaventura de Souza teaches us. And the monocultural and universality typical of the Western approach to education is opposite of what Arturo Escobar defines as a pluriversality, a place for plural universe, many voices, coexistence of plural perspective, which is what, in my opinion, is what we should work to achieve. And it is encouraging to see that the current process of decolonization initiated and strongly requested by the students through the Roadmap 4 started in 2015. Currently, it's focusing the attention on the student request to reforming the Eurocentric curriculum, interrogating the procedure on how the knowledge is produced, who produced the knowledge, and for which purpose. But at these very crucial questions, I would like to highlight and add one more. Who will the knowledge produce benefit? And I would like to okay, thank you. And this last question is a very crucial because it's lined up with the role that the communities can have in the co-create knowledge and the use of the engagement method to produce knowledge that is not relevant only for the internal to the academia, the schools, but strongly orientated to be in service of society. Which is, well, we saw before, that was the core purpose of the Nelson Mandela Vision 2013. In line with this view, and I would like to, share with my contribution two major projects that we are doing in co-creation with the San and Koikwena people, developed under the School of Architecture, and namely the Spirit of Water, Indigenous Ceremony, and a study of the fish traps that started in 2017. And well, is, let's say, also still very much in course. And the Indigenous Architecture of Bavian's Clos. Both of these, which is still in course. And both of these projects seeing the precious collaboration of Lucy Foslo, which is sitting here, and also we also working with Kim Amsen, that is also another colleague, and of course, with the indigenous people as well. And I would like to share those as examples where we try to explore and to establish an indigenous methodology on those projects. So that is why also I'm showing to you. The working group was formed in 2015 under the umbrella of the School of Architecture and is composed of First Nation chiefs and community members, staff, and students. And since then, we focused our focus has been on community engagement project based on transformative participatory action research that involves teaching, learning, and researching. Our work and research use an indigenous methodology that promote acts of cultural reappropriation, reconnecting the first indigenous people with their heritage, with the heritage sites, and reformulating and reconnecting reformulating and reconstructing of the indigenous narrative done by them. This is because of the long history of repression and segregation. The First Nation were brutally stopped and oppressed, and And well, there was a proper, like a serious genocide of the First Nation. And they could, since the arrival of the settled colonialist, and they could not engage anymore with the territory, with the resources, with the sites, sacred sites, and they were also stopped to freely speak the language and practice the culture. And that resulted in a disconnection from the heritage sites, and so the tangible heritage and intangible heritage, and the repression of the cultural identity. I'm saying that because that position the work that we are doing. We can change slide, please. The work we are doing together contributes to the building up of a new knowledge, the restoration of the indigenous culture and identity, the decolonizing of the higher education curriculum, the breaking of the boundary between the indigenous people and the academia, and the building up of equity and inclusivity. We can change slide, please. The First Nation leaders contribute and approve each step of the work that we are doing together, from the ideation of the project to the output sharing. Before we sharing the output needs to be approved. And this aspect is very important because it means that our collaboration is deeply rooted on mutual trust, mutual respect, consultation, which is a very important aspect, and true engagement. In our group, each voices count, and the output produced is really the result of a communal effort. We can change slide, please. Yeah, we saw first the project that we did along the coast, and these are the inland. The next slide, please. And this is the first project, actually, that is the Spirit of the Water, that allowed us to establish the first practice of cultural reappropriation, and that was done on the fish traps, which are the most ancient infrastructure that we can find along the coast globally, and those ones are really in our backyard. And really were built by the ancestor of the current First Nation along the coast, and they were used to catch the fish using the movement of the ocean, and really speak about the deep understanding of the nature, actually, the system of nature. So the tide, the moon, the current, the movement of the fish, and everything. And this project, where we spent 2 days with the 4 houses of the chief, and students and staff and people that just were interested, were 2 very intense days, very important days, because also was an occasion to restore the ritual, ancient ritual, and to bring together, really for the first time, probably maybe after century, the 4 houses of the indigenous people there in front of their heritage sites. And really to freely celebrate the culture. We can change slide, please. And this was a key project also that strengthened the partnership with the first indigenous people and initiated our groundbreaking research on the undocumented ancient fish trap. Next slide, please. Located in the Eastern Cape province. We received funds from the National Research Foundation, and we could visit places along the coast with the chief and the community member and document those places. Next slide, please. Here also with the students, we saw an example yesterday of involvement of the students as a year exercise of learning experience, and here also was another. We saw yesterday inland, let's say, on the village in the Bavianskloof. This one was along the coast, as a year exercise for History 3. We can change also slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. This is the output co-produced. Oh, this is a very important moment because it's a moment where we share the outputs with the community, and that sharing, which is very much based on performance, so sort of storytelling to the community of what we have done, is very important, because speak about also an indigenous methodology we use really as a way of communicating this sort of performance instrument. So exhibition, documentary, visual, visual outputs that really speak about the indigenous language, indigenous way of communicating, and that for me is very important. Yes, we published books, we published papers, and are very important for the community as well, because it's a tangible element that can be passed to the next generation. We can see, can you please proceed? And of course, now also those are moments of expressing the culture, expressing, again, this important moment of cultural education. Next one. Those are some of the output produced. So our open source book, very important, always need to be open source. Everybody need to be able to achieve those. As well, some papers, a documentary, traveling exhibitions, and there is the group of chief, which were acknowledged as co-author of the book as well. We can change slide. Okay, now this one is the project that we briefly present yesterday, and is starting in 2021. 2 minutes, yes, I will be good and short. And it's important to know that we are the only group in Africa that we receive, in Southern Africa, that we receive funds from the Oxford Brookes University to document a village in Bavians's cloth, together with the indigenous people. And this is going to be the first time that actually an indigenous First Nation village and heritage is going to be part of an open source archive. And well, if you go and have a look of the project, all the names of the people of the neighborhood chief are there, acknowledged as a part of the group. And again, in collaboration with Lucy and colleagues. Yes, these are some moments of the data collection, some moments with the student as well. Always we start the day with a prayer, and always we start a day addressed by the chief. And that is really how we do work, and we're trying also to be educated and by the indigenous people, and educate ourselves and the student as well. Those are examples of the houses that we survey. This again, we did a documentary where we documented the building process, and here we shared with the community before we shared with all the other people. Actually, we did couple of international screening of the documentary, but please, if you can click next slide, and I'm in the conclusion. And again, there is this aspect of sharing is an important moment of where the community can express the culture. And yes, in conclusion, what we are doing inside the academia, colleagues and students and attenders, we must be relevant for the communities out there. We must understand the needs of society, and the best way of doing so is by working together, bringing the community inside the academia to have a debate and carefully listen what they have to say, and find a way to create a third space where we can be relevant together, and when we can make a tangible difference. I thank you.
Thanks so much, Magda. Becky, would you like to come up? Also feel free to introduce yourself however you prefer. And you have 15 minutes. I'll be somewhere at the back. I'll put up hands for 10 and for 5 minutes, and then I'll come and lurk.
Or I can pretend not to see you. Colleagues, in the interest of time, I'm not going to say all the things I wanted to say, except to say the achter ons kom ook in the crowd. That's what I was told under apartheid. Yeah, I'm starting off this conversation on a very bad note. I woke up today, I was discussing MK and ANC, which I'm fine with. I always do that. I enjoy offending politicians. I like that. But then I received a call that my home girls have been marked in town. That is why I arrived late. I spent time at the police station. So I'm an angry man. And no matter, I don't want to fight. But if I do get someone doing something to the people I value, I normally lose my temper. Thank God I didn't find them. So I went to the police station just to open the case and get affidavit and do other things. But please, if it's your relative or your brother or sister or whatever, they must make sure that they stay clear of where I am. Because I'm a nice guy, but I can be something else. Okay, in the interest of time, colleagues, my presentation is just straightforward. And I hope I'm not going to offend anyone. If you get offended, then of course I have nothing to do with it. We are basically looking at some of the impediments because we've been talking about Africanization, decolonization, all those kinds of things. But then the question is, what is preventing us from achieving that goal? Because we all aspire to get somewhere, but for some reason we're not able to do so. So what are some of the impediments? So I just, we can just list the outline. I'm not going to talk about, to read that. It's self-explanatory. Let's go straight to my introductory remarks, where I start off by saying that the concept Africanization and decolonization have been loosely and in some instances interchangeably used in recent times by academics, politicians, and students. And I find this disturbing because these two concepts, in fact, don't mean one and the same thing. Decolonization, I can be an Indian in India and I talk about decolonization, but I can only talk about Africanization here in the African context. But then people normally use these terms interchangeably. So that's why then I make the claim that they've been used loosely and to the extent that they've lost meaning. Part of the reason is that these concepts have been misconstrued to mean one and the same thing. In other words, there are people who would use Africanization today, use decolonization tomorrow. Others would even add localization, and then they claim these concepts mean one and the same thing. They don't. And I'm not going to spend time explaining them in the interest of time before Jenny kicks me out here. Some authors link internationalization to colonialism and argue that it cannot coexist with Africanization. There are people who tell you that there is no way that you can talk about Africanization on the one hand and then still talk about internationalization on the other. That is them, not me. I hold a totally different view. They argue that the existence of Africanization and decolonization depends on the annihilation or destruction of concepts like globalization, westernization, and internationalization. In other words, coming or making an argument that for you to push this Africanization agenda, you must first displace all others. That is one argument I don't embrace, but then there are people who say that. Conversely, a counter view is that these concepts are not inimical. In other words, they can coexist. They're not inimical. They're not inimical to each other. And I've covered this issue elsewhere. Each privileges one geographical space over another. For example, if you are pushing the Africanization agenda, it doesn't mean that you are against internationalization. In my other life, before Jenny, Ruby Ann, and others brought me here screaming and kicking, I was teaching in international relations theory. And one of the things I did was when I arrived at that institution, whatever that institution was, I said, I'm not going to teach this curriculum. It's either you allow me to Africanize it or I pack my bags and go back to KZN. Luckily, they allowed me because they needed me more than I needed them. So it worked well for me. So one of the things that I did was that before I teach the concepts that Cliff was talking about, before I talk about liberalism, Marxism, all these theories, I said I want to talk about Ubuntu. I want to talk about Afrocentricity, Afrocentrism. So I spent 2 weeks talking about that. Once students are grounded on that, only then do I introduce the other theories. And students liked it. Even students who are not in my class, they would come to attend. Masters, PhDs, they would come and attend, and I enjoyed it. I'm still in touch with them because of that. The call for decolonization in higher education is linked to the redress of past wrongs. In other words, we move from the premise that things have gone wrong in the past, and then we are correcting those. That is the reason why we are basically doing things differently. Internal and external factors derail this process. In other words, they are not only external factors, but they're also internal factors. Which takes me to the next slide. Impediments to decolonization. One, I start with exogenous causal factors, in other words, external factors. The first, of course, is funding agencies. If you don't have money, they say, he who pays the piper calls the tune. So that is what normally happens. So you may find that you desperately want to push the Africanization, decolonization agenda, but you don't have money. Those who have money will tell you, okay, you want to do this, okay, you will do it on our terms. That is one of the external factors. Secondly, control of various publishing houses. You know, they are gatekeepers. You want to publish an article and then you are told, no, for this to get in here, you must change this and change it. At one point, I received a 2-page review from one of the externals, and then I responded with a 4-page response. And I said, no, if you want to write your article, go and write yours, not mine. Luckily, the chief editor agreed with me and the article was published. This is what normally happens. You'll find this when you publish. There are people who want to tell you what to do when they are not doing their own stuff. You just have to stand your ground. If it doesn't get there, it's fine. You can do without that, and then you can still achieve the goal. Neo-colonial tendencies by erstwhile colonizers, like we're talking in the previous session, where the French would still want to have a hold on Africa, the British want to do the same, the Belgians, and so on and so forth. So we have that legacy, and they want to make sure that their presence is there indefinitely. Unfair evaluation of multilateral institutions. There are times when we give multilateral institutions more than they deserve, and then at the expense, of course, the Africanization and decolonization agenda. And then the last one is borrowed, transplanted, and imbibed curriculum and cultural practices. There is no problem learning from other experiences, but there is a serious problem when you imbibe it like a sponge. You suck water as it is, and then you take it from there, and then we bring it to Africa. I mean, at what expense? We're not going to achieve that change. These are some, not all, these are some of the external factors. Now let's go to the internal factors, what I call endogenous causal factors. The first one, political leadership deficit, which lacks vision about the future of the African continent. There are leaders who don't deserve to be leaders. I offended people at the Commonwealth meeting and I said, no, one, I don't think you all deserve the label honorable members. And two, some of you are here by default. Some are to climb over corpses to be where you are. Others are to exchange brown envelope. Initially, they were scared, but the more I went about this, they ended up laughing because they could see that I meant business. And then eventually, we touched base. So there are leaders who don't deserve to be leaders. And then as long as we have them, we're not going to achieve the goal. Two, the intelligentsia which suffers from identity crisis. You are an African, you call yourself an Africanist, but there is nothing to show. Then we have a problem because it means through the research, through teaching, we are not going to be embracing the Africanization and decolonization agenda. Three, overemphasis on skewed bilateral relations among countries. If we have a relationship with a country X, there is no problem with that. But the more you make that country your God, then it becomes a problem. They are the ones who will be dictating the terms. And then, of course, a student body that has been consumed by acculturation. There is acculturation and there is enculturation. Ask Uncle Google, you will know the difference. But if our students have not internalized this Africanization agenda, you can go to class, try to teach them from an Afrocentric point of view. They will say, no, this one is living in the old ages. And then we try to conduct research using African methods and then say, we want realism, we want idealism, we want Marxism. I can't write it, this is using Ubuntu. One of my master's students got a distinction basing her thesis on Ubuntu philosophy. And it was examined by people from within Africa and outside Africa, and I was happy with that. resource constraints, which links to the first point I made previously. So these are just some of them. Now, I'll just run through this very quickly. The East African experience, in most of my research, you'll find me drawing from East Africa. That's because even though my PhD I was done in the US, but I did my research in Kenya, mainly, although I was looking at all East African countries. Now, leaders like Tanzania's President Nyerere called for the decolonization of the Federal University of East Africa, which existed from 1963 to 1970, and it was disbanded for other reasons, which you can talk about during lunch. Then academics like Beto Lokot, who is still there, and was based at Maseno University, and then he also tried his level best to push the Africanization agenda, but others said, no, no, you can't do that. He did that at the Federal University. He also did that at the University of Nairobi, where he was based, and then, of course, there was a resentment. Politicians at the East Africa Legislative Assembly, which, of course, was the first EAC, not the current one. The first one was formed between 1967 and then it was disbanded in 1977. So there were debates about this Africanization, decolonization, and it was a hot debate to the extent that some would end up insulting one another. If you read those parliamentary debates, they're very interesting. Some agreed with this project, but then others were opposed to it, arguing that it was going to lower the standards. We still have that today. The moment we approach things from an African perspective, we are told, no, we are going to lower the standards. According to whom? Those are the questions we should be asking. And then, of course, at times, the academic and political leadership did not agree on what needed to be done. There will be academics on one side and politicians on the other side, and there will be a struggle, and then would not find your way forward. That is basically some of the things that happened there. Now, towards finding a solution, delays in advancing the decolonization agenda will be sustained unless we take concrete steps. One, inclusion and exclusion should happen simultaneously. In other words, if we want Africans to push the agenda, we cannot do that by excluding Europeans. Otherwise, we'll be talking amongst ourselves and it's not going to achieve any goal. So inclusion and exclusion should happen simultaneously. Two, intercultural encounters should be promoted. I was happy that my sister here and my brother there spoke to this issue. So in other words, we have to understand what is it that we stand for and then live what we preach. And then, of course, government should take the lead. If our government still embraces the constitution in its current form, I was happy my sister made this point because Conrad, in fact, is pushing an agenda, not of a constitutional amendment, but a constitutional review. Because the constitution in its current form was meant for a particular process during the reconciliation period. We don't have our own constitution. Ask yourself why our constitution is embraced by many countries in the world, but it's not saving us. It's because it saves them more than it saves us. And then academic institutions should decolonize the curriculum and research approaches and not to do things the way we've been doing. And then, of course, lecturers and researchers must embrace decolonization in their spaces. If I conduct research like my colleague has been doing, that is the way to do, not to try and satisfy Europeans. Europeans that can do their own things, we can go to their universities, learn a thing or two, come back, infuse it in our system, but you mustn't change who we are. That's why some of us refused to stay in the countries where we studied because we wanted to make change here. Students should welcome and support the colonization agenda. We, as lecturers, as administrators, as everyone, we can Africanize. If students don't embrace that, then we're just fighting a losing battle. And then, of course, parents and community should be part of the process because if parents don't believe what we're doing is right, they're not going to help us. And these were just my concluding remarks, which is the last slide. You can read that during your spare time. And then, of course, coming after that, the next slide, please. That one is very important. That will make Jenny happy. And that is the one. Thank you.
I feel like our events normally get a reputation for being strict on time or something because the amount of comments we have gotten from presenters. Anyway, thank you very much for the very timeous and fascinating presentations. So we have about 20 minutes for Q&A. I don't know if the panelists would like to bring chairs and just sit at the front. For the actual questions, there's an ambient mic. So we're not going to have a roving mic. People who have questions can just speak, and then we can just get some responses from the panel. Okay, so I'll take a first round of maybe 3 hands and then go from there. Yeah, you have, this is like the moment of interrogation. Okay, I note 1 hand, 2 hands, and 3 hands. Let's start with Ruby. Just project, please.
Question. How would you like to take those questions forward in the university environment, especially as far as the categorization of African students from other African states as we can.
Thanks, Ruby. And then we'll take the second question. Thank you. And then Kani. Thanks very much. Let's take a round of responses then to those, and then I think we can then take another round of questions. Adelaide, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Levendal, about how these questions should be taken forward in terms of the institution. While I was hoping that this discussion would carry forth into the Africanization and Decolonization working group that we have, I have spoken to Jenny about this, and there has to be a significant student consultative process, African student consultative process there, in being able to understand what do African students see themselves as. I was part of the orientation program as we are as the transformation office, and I posed that question. There was separate sessions for international students, which I was part of those, and those international students were African students. And I posed questions to them like, what does inclusion or integration mean for you? When you're in this space, what do you think about Afrophobia? How would you deal with it? And they said, well, I'll do nothing. My job is to come here, study, and go my voice doesn't matter. I'm not at home. Hence, I asked, do African students, when they touch the soil here, see themselves as being at home? You see the African flags only flying at the international office, right next to the flags of those that are involved in the oppression of Africans. Quite interesting, isn't it? And you only see them there. So hence the discussion about how to rope in other members, other staff members or community. When we enter the university space, do we say this is a strong African presence? Question to think about there. So I am hoping that this doesn't end here. I know our very beloved DVC yesterday said, this is only the beginning, it's the start and not the end. So I hope that this conversation is then the beginning and not the end. In terms of Agenda 2063, in terms of the research that we're doing, how are we looking at framing it towards the development of the African continent? Well, for me, because this is what I believe I must also live what I believe. So my thesis, my doctoral thesis, looks at how to get South Africa, and a paper that I'm writing, an article now, the rest of Africa into the deep sea bed mining space. Africa is the only region that's excluded. How do we get in there? Because now it's going to be the same thing as the exploitation of Africa. They're going to go in, take everything out, and then when they're done, say, okay, now go get the byproducts. So that is what my thesis has looked at. And I've looked at the recommendations for South Africa to also enter that space. I'm not South African, but I care. South Africa is my home. I was born in Zimbabwe, made in South Africa. So I am living in my context what I believe. And this is then the message to all of us then, that we must live what it is that we're preaching. How to implement this into the curriculum? Well, I think then that becomes the very important question for us to grapple with at this stage, because only when I got to postgraduate level could I then now start looking at the things that I love. So in my undergraduate, there were modules like customary law and so forth. But I often questioned, okay, we have a legal expert teaching us about customary law. Where's the chief? Where's the headsman also telling me how these practices go? But obviously, at that point, it was just a question to ponder, because I felt like I'm a very, very, very small fish in this very, very, very big pond. So that, I think, is something for us to look at in terms of how to in terms of our curriculum and the way we teach, how to bring in the community that lives this actual experience into our teaching. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I address the question that was directly to me, let me just respond to the point, to the question raised by Ruby Ann. Last year when I arrived here, we organized the Africa Month event, and then there was the Youth Day event, which was packed to capacity. This question came that of African students being called international students. And I was preparing for my trip to Australia to deliver the keynote address on Nelson Mandela. One of the things I did, I promised the team that I was going to put this on paper and set up a meeting with the VC to make her aware of this. And I did exactly that. So I made this known to the VC, I made it known to Prof. Kiet. And then one of the initial responses was that indeed this is a national problem. I said, no, I agree with that 100%. But we are Nelson Mandela University. Let us take the lead. So my understanding is that my bosses are working on the matter, and this is going to put even more pressure to expedite the process, because it's an insult to call a student from Zimbabwe, from Mozambique, from Eswatini, an international student. And then when it suits us, we call them African students. Then when there are resources, no, these are international students. And the money they pay is triple what a South African student pays, when some of their countries are in a worse economic situation than we are. So that is something that definitely needs to be attended to. How do we address this issue? without necessarily imbibing what is happening elsewhere, like to use the word I used earlier. No, let me start off by saying that the Africanization decolonization agenda is not going to be an event. It's going to be a process. But we have to start from somewhere. I keep citing East Africa. One of the things that was done in the Africanization project was to say, if I'm teaching history, I'm teaching political science, I'm teaching law, let me involve communities. During a break time, you give your students an assignment, go to a grandmother, go to a granddaughter, ask about this and this and this. When they come back, they come with reports. We talk about things that are real, not theories that come from somewhere. Because the late Milton Obote of Uganda said at one point he almost failed an exam because they were asking him to write about daffodils. He said, what's that? He didn't know what daffodils were. And then he was saying that had they used examples from Uganda, he would have been one of the best students, but he just barely made it simply because the curriculum was westernized. So I would say that in our individual spaces, we can do it. It's achievable. It's not an event. It's a process. Thank you.
Okay, I didn't really get a question, but just going to quickly touch on, I think Prof already started the indigenization debate, and when we're bringing in African voices, and I always like to link it to my field. I don't believe in sociology now we should only now teach African theorists. There is a current debate between indigeneity and endogeneity. So when we bring in the African voices, my belief is as we bring in the African theorists and the African philosophers, we insert in our voice. We're not going to do what the colonialists did and say now our voice is more important. Within this context it is, but I'm not going to discredit the fact that Karl Marx and Max Weber and Emil Durkheim did the work. They did the work. They did proper research, but they did proper research for their context. So the problem with our field for the longest time, and I will keep critiquing sociology, is these theories were given to us as universal theories. They were not universal theories. They were European theories. They are ideographic. Now, I have to learn it as that. I have to learn that Karl Marx wrote within the context which Karl Marx theorized. And Achim Feje wrote within the context which he theorized. Steve Biko can best be understood within South Africa. But not to say he cannot be applied to Nigeria, but he can best be understood within South Africa. And when I started, I said, when Fela said, you know, you Africans listen to me as Africans, you non-Africans listen to me with open mind. Fela Nicolas Bokuti's theory can best be understood within Nigeria. But there are elements of it that we can use here. So not to say everything Karl Marx and the Europeans wrote are irrelevant. Some of them can actually be used. And I mean, in a lot of the emancipatory movements in Africa, Marxism has been a big part of it. But it cannot end there. You know, our voice must be inserted. And there's something on the end of this, Dr. Bruce always likes saying, because he learned this in Kenya. So it was a colleague in Kenya. He still hasn't given me the colleague's name, so he must do better. But the colleague said, you come in with epistemic humility. So I'm bringing in my voice, but I come in with humility. I'm just inserting my voice within the larger debate. And I'm not going to do what the colonialists did and say my voice is now more important than yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's take one last round and then we can go. So Ati, Meza, Puyo, and then I'm going to abuse my my mic powers to ask one question. But let's start with Ati. You can just go ahead.
My question. I noted the working now I don't know whether the concept. I don't know whether this is implemented now.
Thanks, Ati. Meza.
But also a core system. That's the woman. Because I worry that so and as we speak now, we are waiting to accept and wonder how much of an alignment work around that, how much of an alignment what the and also that we can, you know, where are we finding spaces that influence what is happening? I will definitely make a promise to take some of the conversations because as a common space we have then to speak about the human conversation and after we discuss it. And I understand some of it because obviously we still have leaders as a commitment that are their sort of. But one of my clients was our previous heritage and culture person and how heavily this was participated into programs. This outdoor day is on the foreign and we are doing the from and issues that for the people that we do. And no matter how we want to play, the rich knowledge was gained in both projects into the university so that in culture space we can have full appreciation of the people who do it. And we have so my call is to everyone on how we can change our behavior. But I'm standing on a particular land because I'm and saddened by how we always talk of management as if we're not part of and the ownership of them. So it's more placement and
Thanks, Meza. Thanks so much for you.
So I think I don't have a specific question to you, I think that's but you know, listening to both of that, at this point, how is something how much more does have to have? So when it comes to how much of a condition should you have given your family? Are we going to fight it? Are we going to take a part in saying we're not making it? How are we?
Thanks very much. So I just wanted to say to Pumeza's thing about the ownership of the university, I was also actually thinking about this earlier today in one of the panels. I think it was one of the student panels, and there was the talk about students and then the university as though these two things are separate. And I've heard staff talk that way as well. And I think one, it's concerning that there's this feeling that there is this university that is not us. But also I think it's possibly an important conceptual move to start realizing that the people in the university are what constitute the university, they're what produce it. And maybe if we think about our own roles within the university in various spaces in that way, we might be able to find better ways of like critical agency within obviously a very difficult and constraining system. But we also do produce these things as well. And then I just wanted to ask a question to Magda, and I was thinking of this in relation to what Cliff said about ontology and the way this conception of time that is past and present are together rather than some kind of teleological thing. I was just wondering, in terms of your research, what kind of indigenous ontologies and epistemologies are like emerging, that might challenge Western modes of thinking. Thank you. Should I start your side again, or should I start? Okay. So you're fine.
Oh, thanks. I'm not going to be long in the interest of time. First, indigenous people. My colleagues will handle that question well. But from my standpoint, that statement in itself is pregnant with meaning. Simply because whites came in, they told us they found an empty land. So to counter that view, we then have to demonstrate that actually there were people here. So that notion of first people comes from that historical context. Then we can argue about the second, third, fourth, whatever the case may be. But the first, I can vouch for it. In terms of spaces, I said at the beginning that we must use the spaces that we have. The fact that I'm a security guard doesn't mean that I cannot influence the changes in my own little way. I cannot influence it the same way that the VC would do, the DVCs will do, but I can influence the space where I am, which is the point also I was going to make when my sister said that administrators don't feel that they have a space to voice their opinions. You can talk to your line manager at that level. Hopefully, line managers do engage with the university management, and then they will be in a position to vouch for you, and then the voice will spread. So it doesn't mean that if I contribute one sentence and then Cliff contributes three sentences, then it's better than me. No, for the project to be complete, it needs both of us. So I would say that let's shine in the corners where we are. The issue of wealth rankings, this one is a hot potato. Because there are people, in fact, there are countries that are saying that want to do away with this thing. Because the manner in which it is done is not fair, it's not just, it's not transparent. And then they are saying that they want to question that, and then, of course, it's an ongoing debate. There are people who subscribe to this, and they respect it with everything they have. Our institution has been ranked #1, and they use it even when they apply at the NRF or any other funding agency. So there are people who have, in fact, popularized these wealth rankings when others are saying these things are not working because the manner in which this is done is not objective enough, which then speaks to the issue of resistance. Whenever you do something good, I told politicians last week that normally I grew up in a rural area in Guavum. A dog will not bark on a stationary or a deer that is asleep. The moment the deer starts running, then you start barking. So it means, therefore, that if people are criticizing you, then there is something good that you are doing. It's making them think, just like MK and ANC.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you for the questions. I think that, the question about the first people has been, very well put by my colleagues. But I would like also to just add little observation. If we go and see the symbols of South Africa, over there are two peoples, and those peoples were the first peoples. And those people actually are the one that, and has been put it in that space with also the the text that is on the bottom is a Koigwa language, and speak about the origin of this country. So which, you know, when the colonialists arrived, as my colleague said, there were people here with a very sophisticated culture. So has been painted in a very different way, but that is the colonial agenda, which still very much in place still, you know, there is so much work that needs to be done. And so that is a very important aspect, and in that also acknowledging the First Nation, the Khoi and the San. I was really fascinated about the presentation of Adelaide, because I noticed the language, that aspect of the language where the Khoi Gwap is not a language that, and is the language of the First Nation, so is not acknowledged amongst the official language of Southern Africa, although there are people that speak in that language. The first indigenous people, the Khoi and San, are not acknowledged as indigenous people. There is a bill that has been written, but has not been, actually has been declared as unconstitutional. So there is so much work that needs to be done in that. And yeah, and really the First Nation are really fighting peacefully to be acknowledged constantly. And yes, and as a university that sit in the stolen land, let's call it, not in a land that has been donated, has been, you know, taken from the First Nation. Yes, we should be able to acknowledge more. In one of the photos that of the slides that I show in the presentation, I shared a very important moment that happened last year, where we achieved, when we gave certificates, yes, you were there, certificates to acknowledge the important contribution that these 8 chiefs have given to academia, so that we gave them, and hopefully they will be also soon sort of appointed as a knowledge holders that are engaged in producing or co-produce knowledge with us. They helping to, you know, PhD students. They helping, you know, like postgraduate students. They are helping in class. They are coming in class to teach and to share. You know, we go in the place where we are invited to go, and so, you know, there is really like, but you know, also we are engaged with the transformation department, with the engagement department. There is, you know, like really a path that we are working together in achieving that. And I think that is really, you know, something that is also unique of our university in Southern Africa, honestly speaking. You know, like, it's really a work that really we can be proud of, all of us, you know, to embrace that transformation, which is something that, yes, Jenny, thank you to say that. That is something that we do in, you know, all of us in our, you know, like day by day, you know, like mission, let's say, if you would like to. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try and be quick because food is a national issue. We need to chop. I'm just going to, I'm going to give one answer that ties in the thing of identity and also white ranking. I also do research in music, so I'm in the music space, and I'm going to use an example. So Tyler won the Grammy for Best African or International Performance for a song, Water, right? Make me sweat, make me water. Right. And when she was going up to receive her award, they played Fela, Water. You not get any me. That is a good example of how the Europeans did not know us. And it is, they're ranking our university, but they do not understand the context. And that was just an example of, they gave this award to Tyler, but I'm pretty sure they nominated the body that made that, I've not even heard that song. So so what is the reason? You know, they have their reasons why they do their stuff. There's a reason for their ranking, and I don't know if it's actually for our benefit. So in terms of how we identify, we should be careful with using these classifications to identify ourselves. And also, the university is a space with many identities. The university is not just a learning and teaching space. This is also a company, it's an organization, it's a stakeholder community. The university has multiple identities. And so within our various spaces, we have to own that space. And so not all of us would be involved in learning and teaching. Not all of us would be involved in the transformation space. Not all of us would be involved in the engagement space. But in whatever space you are, there's a value we're trying to achieve at the university, and we need to own it. But then to tie in as I end back to what Adelaide is saying, if the policies hinder that, is a tough thing. So as much as I've come to this university and I want to own it, there's still those, you know, that international classification and all the struggles that come with that even we cannot go fully into, and that isolation of I feel like I want to be part of this vision, but I'm always treated as an other. We address that, but within even that isolation, I can still do the most I can to subscribe to the vision. Thank you.
Okay, let me hope I didn't break anything important. Okay, thank you so much, Adelaide, Becky, Magda, and Cliff, for this wonderful discussion that you've given us the space to have. Thank you everyone for coming and finding space to listen. There is lunch. There are two sides on, so basically either side of the table, you can go to either side to get your lunch. So it should move a bit quicker today. And then we're back for our next session at 2:00 in the main venue. And because Adelaide didn't get a closing remark, would you like to close the session?
Yes, let us eat.